The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way, the Swedish supergroup is back.
There is a particular kind of fame that never quite settles on a person, and Benny Andersson has spent more than 50 years inside it. He is the man who wrote the chords to Dancing Queen, the man whose piano opens The Winner Takes It All, the man who, alongside Björn Ulvaeus, built the melodic backbone of one of the best-selling pop groups in history. And yet, for decades, the story of ABBA has been told mostly through its two women. Agnetha Faltskog and Annie Frid Lyngstad sang the words, wore the sequins, and carried the emotional weight of the songs in front of the cameras. Benny sat behind them at the keyboard, present in every note but rarely in the headline. Now at 78, with ABBA's legacy more secure than it has ever been, the picture of who Benny Andersson actually was is finally starting to come into focus, not through some sudden tell-all confession, but through decades of small, consistent admissions he has made in interviews, documentaries, and the quiet record of his own work. Benny was born on December 16, 1946, in the Vällingby district of Stockholm, into a family where music was simply part of the furniture. His grandfather played the accordion, his father played too, and by the time Benny was old enough to sit at a keyboard, playing wasn't treated as a special talent so much as a family habit, something you did the way other families played cards after dinner. He picked up the accordion himself as a small child, learning old Swedish folk tunes and hymns before he ever touched anything resembling pop music. That early grounding in folk melody and church harmony is often cited by musicologists as the reason ABBA songs, however glossy their production, carry an underlying melancholy that separates them from most disco-era pop. Benny wasn't chasing a sound that was fashionable. He was working from a well of music that predated fashion entirely. His path into professional music started young and started fast. By his late teens, Benny was the keyboardist for the Hep Stars, a Swedish rock and roll outfit that became, briefly, one of the most popular bands in the country. He wrote songs for them, including Sunny Girl, which became a hit, and by his early 20s, he had already experienced a version of teen idol fame in Sweden, complete with screaming crowds and tabloid attention. It was a useful education. Long before ABBA existed, Benny had already learned what it felt like to be a public figure, and he had already begun to understand that writing the songs mattered more to him than performing them. The pivotal meeting came in 1966, when the Hep Stars crossed paths with another Swedish group, the Hootenanny Singers, on tour. Benny struck up a friendship with one of that group's members, a serious, literate young man named Björn Ulvaeus. The two started writing songs together almost immediately, and what began as an informal collaboration between two working musicians would, within a decade, become one of the most successful songwriting partnerships in pop history. Their process, as both men have described it over the years in separate interviews, was fairly consistent. Benny built the music first, working out melodies, chord changes, and structure, often for days or weeks before a single lyric existed, and Björn would then shape words around what Benny had composed. It's an important detail because it means the emotional architecture of an ABBA song, the specific way a happy melody can carry an undertow of sadness, or a heartbreak song can still sound danceable, originated with Benny before anyone had written a word. Both men have said this repeatedly in interviews across the decades. It isn't speculation. It's simply how they worked. In the summer of 1969, two relationships changed the direction of Benny's life at once. Björn met a young singer named Agnetha Faltskog, and around the same time, Benny met a jazz singer named Annie Frid Lyngstad, known to everyone as Frida. Frida's own early life had been difficult in ways that are well documented. She was born in Norway during the German occupation, the child of a Norwegian mother and a German soldier, and she was raised largely by her grandmother after her mother's early death. She had built a career for herself in Sweden as a jazz and cabaret singer before she and Benny began performing and eventually living together. The four of them, Benny, Björn, Frida, and Agnetha, began working as a unit informally through the early 1970s before adopting the name ABBA in 1972, built from the first letters of their first names. What followed is one of the most documented rises in music history. ABBA's Eurovision win with Waterloo in 1974 launched them from a Swedish pop act into an international phenomenon, and across the rest of the decade the group produced an unbroken run of hits: SOS, Mamma Mia, Fernando, Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, The Name of the Game, Take a Chance on Me. Behind almost all of it was the same partnership: Benny at the piano working out melody and structure, Bjorn refining lyrics, and long, meticulous studio sessions, in which Benny in particular was known for reworking a single harmony or arrangement detail obsessively until it matched what he heard in his head. Studio engineers and collaborators who worked with ABBA during this period have described Benny as the most technically demanding member of the group when it came to production. Someone who pushed the band toward multi-track recording and layered arrangements at a time when most pop acts were still working with far simpler setups. It's part of why ABBA's records still sound rich in modern decades later, while much of the disco era around them has dated badly. In 1978, Benny and Frida married. They had been a couple for close to a decade by that point, having met the same summer Bjorn met Agnetha, and their relationship had effectively grown up inside the pressure cooker of ABBA's fame. But the marriage did not last. In 1981, Benny and Frida divorced, just as Bjorn and Agnetha's own marriage was also unraveling around the same period. It is one of the more remarkable and strange facts of pop history that all four members of ABBA were navigating the collapse of their romantic relationships with each other while simultaneously writing and recording some of the most personal, heartbreak-driven music of their career. The Winner Takes It All, often assumed by fans to be Agnetha's direct response to her divorce from Bjorn, was in fact written by Bjorn, who has said in interviews that the lyrics were not a literal transcript of his marriage, but a dramatized version of the feelings surrounding it. What is true, and what both Benny and Bjorn have acknowledged over the years, is that writing and recording continued to happen inside the same small circle of four people even as two of the couples inside that circle were separating. There was no dramatic industry break, no public feud. The band kept working, largely because the professional partnership between Benny and Bjorn as songwriters remained intact even as the personal relationships changed. Very shortly after his divorce from Frida, in 1981, Benny married Mona Norklit, a Swedish television presenter, and the two have remained married for more than 4 decades. They have a son together, Ludwig, born in 1982, who has gone on to have his own career as a musician and producer, and who has been closely involved in producing the ABBA Voyage concert experience that launched in London in 2022. Benny also has 2 children from an earlier relationship in the 1960s, a son and a daughter, born before ABBA existed. Across interviews given over the years, Benny has generally spoken about this period of his life, the divorce from Frida and remarriage to Mona, in fairly measured terms, describing it as a difficult but ultimately necessary transition rather than framing it as scandal or tragedy. He has not, in any verified interview, offered the kind of intimate emotional confession that gets attributed to him in some retrospective videos online. What he has said consistently is that the music and the relationships were tangled together in ways that were sometimes hard to separate, and that writing songs was, for him, always the more comfortable form of expression compared to conversation. By 1982, ABBA had effectively stopped working together as a group, though there was no formal announcement of a breakup at the time. There was no farewell tour, no dramatic press conference. The group simply stopped recording new material together, and each member moved into other projects. Benny has described the end of ABBA less as a single event and more as a gradual loss of creative momentum, a sense that the group had said what it had to say and that continuing to force new material would have been artistically dishonest. This account lines up with what's known about the period. The band's final studio album, The Visitors, released in 1981, is noticeably darker and more introspective than their earlier work, reflecting both the members' personal upheavals and a genuine artistic evolution, before the group quietly wound down rather than exploded apart. What Benny did next says a great deal about what actually mattered to him. Rather than chasing further pop success, he and Bjorn moved into musical theater, partnering with lyricist Tim Rice to write Chess, a concept album, and later a full-stage musical set against a Cold War-era chess championship. It produced the hit song One Night in Bangkok and gave Benny and Bjorn a serious foothold in musical theater. Later, Benny wrote the score for Kristina Fran de Vemela, a Swedish-language musical based on Vilhelm Moberg's novels about 19th-century Swedish emigration to America, a deeply personal project rooted in Swedish history and folk tradition rather than pop spectacle. He has spoken about Christina in interviews as one of the works he is proudest of, precisely because it let him return to the folk and classical roots he grew up with, away from the pressure and scrutiny that came with being in the world's biggest pop group. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Benny continued composing, producing, and occasionally performing with his own folk-oriented band, Benny Andersson's Orchestra, formed in 2001, which allowed him to play the kind of Swedish dance band and folk music he'd loved since childhood, largely outside the spotlight of international fame. It was, by most accounts, a genuinely happy period for him professionally, a chance to make music on a smaller, more personal scale after decades of operating at a global level. The idea of ABBA returning was, for years, something Benny and the others consistently denied, sometimes bluntly, in interview after interview. That changed in 2018 when the group announced they had recorded new material, and in 2021 released Voyage, their first new album in 40 years. The following year, the ABBA Voyage concert experience opened in London, featuring digital avatars, or ABBA, of all four members performing alongside a live band, a project years in development that Benny has spoken about with evident enthusiasm, describing it as a way to let audiences, particularly younger ones who never saw the group perform live, experience the songs in a new form. He has talked in interviews about how strange and moving it was to see a digital version of his younger self performing songs he wrote half a century earlier. A genuinely reflective experience for a man who has spent most of his adult life somewhat uncomfortable with being looked at directly. Now at 78, what emerges from the full documented record of Benny Andersson's life isn't a hidden scandal or a shocking confession, but something quieter and, in its way, more interesting. He has never been the member of ABBA most comfortable in front of a camera, and he has said as much himself, describing his role within the group as being about the music first and the public image a distant second. He has spoken with real consistency across 5 decades of interviews about the discipline of songwriting, the specific mechanics of building a melody with Bjorn, the technical curiosity that pushed ABBA's studio work forward, and the ways that composing music has always come more naturally to him than talking about his feelings in the abstract. None of that requires invention or exaggeration to be compelling. The truth is that a working-class boy from Vallonby, who grew up